Mira a la izquierda. Mira a la derecha. ¿Qué ves? ¿Dónde estás? In a world that seems to change daily, what will you do next? Welcome to the Next Steps Show with Peter Vasquez and co-host Aisha Kreutz, a starting point for discussion y un poco de dirección. Bienvenidos, soy yo, your conservative New Yorker, Peter Vasquez, here in studio at the YSL stations out in the woods with my homegirl,
the extraordinary machine, Aisha Kreutz.
You know, we gotta talk about this.
What? Why am I an extraordinary machine?
Oh, we all know why you're an extraordinary machine.
You don't know what that's from. Although, See, if you're geeky, they understand that. But if you're not...
Oh, thank you for not calling me geeky. So let's educate our listeners as to why you're the extraordinary... hang on a second. The part that I really thought we should talk about, though, is the unexcited extraordinary machine.
Unexcited?
You were like, hey, it's Aisha, the extraordinary machine.
Yeah, I was kind of laid back there. I was wondering.
Hey, I thought I was going to have to poke you to wake you up. Oh, really? Okay, for all those listening to this show that knows Aisha, please remind her there is nothing laid-back kind of girl with her.
What are you talking about? I'm one of the most even-keeled people you'll ever meet.
Passionate.
I am passionate sometimes.
I'm just
it just depends on what you got to be.
I think that's why we have been clicked so well, because...
Clicked?
Hey,
what do you mean, high school? Clicky. No, I'm joking.
Where did that come from?
What?
Oh, dear.
It's probably an American colloquialism that he doesn't understand. Click.
Ladies and gentlemen, special announcement to the audience. Actual content is approaching on this program. It will start before too long.
No,
hang in there.
It won't. Click military. That's probably what you think. I think high school.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Next Step Show. And we don't always talk about click, but here we do have a mission. You remember our mission?
Synergy.
Synergy! I like synergy, creating synergy. Ladies and gentlemen, on our show, this is not a political show, but we talk politics, right? We talk about the balance of faith, politics, and entrepreneurship. Our whole mission is to empower and inspire individuals to achieve, check this out, equilibrium.
Oh.
In their pursuit of faith, politics, and entrepreneurship. So today, we are going to talk a little bit about politics. Today, we have a guest who's right here from Monroe County, born and bred right in the Gates, the town of Gates. Beautiful town, by the way. Right? She's the daughter of a law enforcement officer. She has a passion for music. Listen, if you haven't heard her sing the national anthem, you've got to stop at one of the events that she's doing, because just amazing. Amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming the Honorable Virginia McIntyre, who is also a candidate for Monroe County's, what district are you running for?
District 4. So that's about 2/3 of Gates and the southern part of Greece that's in front of Unity Hospital.
Check that voice, ladies and gentlemen. We got to get her to do commercials.
Absolutely.
I did that in Italy, actually.
In Italy. So you talk about that. You lived in Italy for almost 20 years, right? Did you do radio?
Yes. Well, occasionally. And I did recordings. There's one up, actually, that I've shared out on my Virginia McIntyre for County Legislator page, where I'm talking about the wines in the region because they needed someone to record in English, and that was done. The recording was not done in what I would normally call a recording space. We did it quickly.
Wow.
So there were no filters on it, but it came out fairly well. And
so it's not a cassette recorder in the back seat of a taxi somewhere.
Yeah, no. It was it was done in a closed area, but it wasn't like the microphones that were used were not what I would normally use if I was doing a recording for other radios. Television shows.
So let's get right into who you are, right? One of the things that I like our listeners to know is the individuals that we bring on. I want them to know who they are. You know, we talk a lot about the things that we do, the great things that we do, the fights that we're in, all that. But very few times do we take the time to tell people, hey, this is who I am. So if you don't mind, Virginia, please, who are you? Where did you come from? How did you get to where you are? And, what steps did you take to get to where you are?
Absolutely, because it's a long story. I was obviously born at St. Mary's Hospital, and then after my parents did not. I was probably the first in the generation of those families that broke up. So I have a very strong-willed mother, and she was the first female sergeant ever at the Rochester Psychiatric Center in the Office of Mental Health.
What was
She's a peace officer.
Peace officer?
Yes.
Your mom?
My mother. Oh, you didn't know my mom was in law enforcement?
I did not know
Yes,
that.
my mother, and she was a tough lady, a very, very tough lady, and she went to MCC for criminal justice back in the day when that was very few women were doing that. And actually, there was a lot of resistance to her being promoted as sergeant. There was a lot of bullying. There were a lot of things that happened to her. Now, she's good friends with everyone now, but back in the day, it was literally they had gone on record saying they would never have a female sergeant. And there was a case filed against them, not by my mother. My mother never got involved with any of that kind of stuff. She said, well, if they don't want me, I guess that's how it is. But once they were forced at a certain point to admit that they were discriminating, when they did the hiring process, she had the highest test scores. She had the highest score on all of the different exams, and she was a shoo-in for the position. But due to a lot of the pressure that was happening and the bullying and other things, I mean, she got hit by a patient, knocked out, was risking a concussion, and she stayed on the job because there was no one to relieve her, and she wrote reports all the same, and they still were able to criticize her for that, or they tried. And at a certain point, she said, you know what, I just don't want to be fighting with everybody all the time to do my job, and she went back to being an officer. But it was historic at the time because she was the first woman to be promoted to that position after they had so strongly resisted promoting a woman to sergeant.
So your family has been trailblazers right from the beginning.
Oh my gosh. And yes, my mother, again, my mom and my dad, she was one of the first, I think, to be in that kind of generation of kids that were growing up with divorced families. I don't have any memories of them together. They broke up when I was about 18 months old. And immediately we went back to my grandparents' house on 154 Colwick Road. I'll say where that is. We don't live there anymore. They changed the color. I've checked up on the house several times since I've been home because they changed it from the mustard yellow that it was to a lovely green. But that was a house that my grandfather bought in I believe it was 1948. I've asked my real estate agent friend to look into exactly when he bought the house, but he used to tell me, when we moved in here, it was just fields and fields. So that is where my mother was raised. That is where I was raised. And then my mother and I, after my grandmother's death, my grandmother died. I'm named after my grandmother. My grandmother was Virginia Eleanor, and thus I am Virginia Eleanor. And when my grandmother passed, which was that was rough on me. She died of Addison's disease. So my grandmother looked kind of like Aisha because Addison's disease changes the color of your skin. And a lot of people thought because my grandmother was a quarter Native American that she was black. So I didn't understand why my grandmother was darker until I was older. Like when I was a little girl, I thought she was black. It didn't bother me at all. But that's why I have sort of a different perspective on things because I understand how things can change. They used to tell me that she had freckles. I was like, well, of course she didn't have freckles, but she did because she used to be, in her wedding picture, she looks like Snow White.
And I have freckles.
I know you do. But my grandmother, you could not see them. She was pretty much the color that you are. That's how I remember her. Yeah. Maybe she was lighter. I just remember her as being this, very darkish tone. And always wondering how when I was a little girl, how she got that dark, right? I would run my hands along her skin wondering, how did she do that?
hey, Bob and Aisha, I mean, this really just, we've talked in the past about how this whole nonsense of race and doing things by skin color. And I mean, that's just another example of why it's so absurd and disastrous to go and separate people by skin color.
Yeah.
We've got someone who had a health issue, right?
Yeah. Well,
who changed their skin color. And
my grandfather and grandmother went on a train trip across country for, I think it was their 35th wedding anniversary, and I was a little girl. And apparently, down south, they thought they were an interracial couple. They stopped the train for about an hour as they looked through all of their things. And my grandfather thought it was hilarious. My grandmother, not so much. Because he looked over and he said, oh, ha, ha, they thought I was, with a black lady. And he had to explain to them that she's not black, she's sick. Can you imagine? He had to produce the medication that she took for Addison's disease because they were convinced that this was an interracial couple and that was illegal where they were traveling at that time.
They used to have this thing called the Green Book.
Yeah.
Have you heard of the Green Book?
No.
Yeah, the Green Book was published, and it was for, quote unquote, Don't throw stuff at your radios, folks. The Negro Traveler. And this thing, it was a list of accommodations, by state and city, where black folks, African American folks could stay. It was like a AAA, like a trip tick. And this thing was published, I want to say, into like the 1970s. Started like in the 1940s.
Wow. Never heard of that. I have to research that.
You can get old copies of it, that's been reproduced, and just go to Amazon and put in the search field, just type the Green Book.
I didn't realize it was all the way to the 70s. Yeah.
Certainly late
that it was published?
Late 60s, certainly.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Planned Parenthood had the ability to donate money to give
abortions
specifically to black people. So, and that was
up
until the 80s or 90s?
Years ago. Oh, up until probably 15 years ago.
Yeah, so it doesn't surprise me that something like this will continue. So you spent 20 years in Italy.
Yes, I did. Oh, yes. Well, okay. Well, going through, yes. Okay, so what happened is that as a child, right, my thing was singing. And I literally started telling people that I wanted to sing as soon as I could talk. My grandmother used to take me to a place that is now right next to where Veneto's is on Buffalo Road, Mary's Donut Shop. And when she would take me in there, 18 months, 2 years old, I was singing the alphabet song. And people, because that was a weird thing for a child to do, people were like, is that baby singing? And my grandmother would be like, oh, yeah, she's singing. And my grandfather used to tell me to stop the warbling because he hated it. But I was dead set from the moment I saw Crystal Gale on Sesame Street.
I love Crystal
Gale.
Gale.
With her long hair, and I tried to get my hair that long when I was a little girl. And I realized that was a job. And so when people asked me what I wanted to do, I'd say, oh, I'm going to be a singer. That's what I'm going to do. And initially my family, because of like the girl power aspect, okay, and the fact that they felt women had worked so hard to carve out a place in the professional world, and I had very high testing scores as far as intelligence and stuff goes. They wanted me to be a lawyer or a doctor, something that would, give back to the women who had not been able to do so before me. So when I said I wanted to be a singer, my grandmother was set against it. They looked at me and said, yeah, we'll talk when you're older. But the more time went on, the more I dug into that. And right before she died, she gave me permission to study because she realized that I had started singing with the professional groups through the Rochester Bach Children's Choir. And I would later go on to be promoted actually by Gates Chili, by the school district, to sing in New York City and other places as a soloist for the choir. I mean, that was really something that they helped me with. I want to find those old newspapers now because they would actually put me into their paper and put it out there. Aww. When I was doing stuff with RAPA. It was a big deal back in the day. Once I started doing the classical singing, I just took off. It just took off, and she gave me permission right before she died. She was like, okay, all right. She cried. She had tears in her eyes. And I remember her looking at me saying, you don't know how hard it is to be hungry. Because she had grown up in a family that had just been, remember, they were a quarter Native American, and they were considered sort of the riffraff of wherever they were because her father was a musician for a certain amount of time and wasn't really holding a job, and her mother had to wait in the lines to ask for welfare, and she didn't have shoes and had she had a series of issues as a child. It was just terrible.
Well, and as a parent, you're like, yeah, great, my kid wants to be a singer.
Yeah, she felt that,
you know what I mean? Starving musician.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
I could see that,
Yeah. So that was her, looking at me saying, do you understand what you're doing? Because they had never really been able to depend on the men in their lives, for economics before my grandfather. My grandfather was great. My grandfather did everything. But because she and her mother and her, I think it was 4 brothers and sisters, there was like 5 of them, had such a hard time because her father hadn't held a steady job. The idea was, as a woman, you must be prepared to take care of your family. And they were looking forward to me doing something, like I said, doctor, lawyer, something that they would be sure of. And so this idea that I was going to go into a career that was so, it's hard to actually
poverty-stricken.
Make it. Yeah, well, it was something that for her, she was so concerned that she would leave me without a way to take care of myself.
Yeah.
And I looked at her and I said, Grandma, I'll do it. I know what I'm getting into. I'm not afraid of this. I will find a way to support myself no matter what. Which is why I started waitressing while I was still in high school, because I said, you know what? I understand the reality of what I'm doing.
So
Let me
how old were
acquire
you?
some skills.
How old were you around this time?
I started waitressing at 16 years old at the Friendlies that used to be on where Lyle becomes Spencerport. Like right now, there's a Rite Aid that they need to sell, but that was my first job.
And then when did you go to Italy?
I went to Italy after Purchase because while I was in high school, I really struggled after the death of my grandmother. And that's why when I was talking to Dave Lipp about it, I was 12 years old, not yet 13, and dealing with the fact that hit in the face with mortality, and she was my life. I mean, she and I would sleep under her bed and hold her hand until I fell asleep. Aww. So she was my support system, right. 100%. And losing her hit me hard. And I wasn't really prepared to, I didn't understand how the world went on, right? But when you're 12 years old, you don't understand that because your world is over. Yeah. And everybody else keeps going. And I struggled with depression quite a bit throughout high school, and it was rough. And I struggled with the expectations that everybody had of me because I had been this sort of stellar student, and all of a sudden, the people around me could not take care of me because they were mourning. We had issues, I probably should have spent more time with my father's house, but there were issues with his second wife, and it just, my world came crashing down around me. And it was crazy because I felt like I was almost invisible. Nobody around was helping with the situation. And so my grades struggled. I still graduated with honors. I mean, but I wasn't. It's weird because I got grades very easily. And that's actually, sometimes that can be a disadvantage because you don't try. Yep. And when people are not expecting you to try, right? So I was sleeping through classes. I was dealing with a lot. And actually, I bumped into Dina Jajos, who was she was the cheerleading coach that had actually helped me while I was doing the musicals at school. So I was Ado Annie, and she was the one that fought for me to be able to do that, even though there were other people that are saying, well, she's got some issues and this and that. She fought for me. And it was, I'm going to tear up talking about it. When I was out doing some stuff for the school board campaigns last year, I bumped into her. And it was wonderful. It was great to see her again. And the support that there were a few people out there that just kind of kept me going. And then, okay, so I'm tearing up, obviously. When I got out of high school, I did 2 years at MCC and got my act really together. So like I said, I graduated in the top 25% of my class. It's not like I didn't, but I was not. My head was not in studying.
And, MCC, that, say what you will about community college.
Oh, it was great.
Stuff, but, that's a lot of people for MCC, Monroe Community College here in Rochester, New York, that, again, tough time sometimes in high school figuring out next step. They go to MCC and really get stuff together and then have a launching pad. You know what I mean? Like, if you use it for that, because they actually have a pretty good education there at MCC. I mean, I don't know about now.
They got a really good support structure
really
that if you choose to take advantage of it, you will definitely see great things happen.
And it was amazing. It got me back on track. Yeah. So by the time the first year I was waitressing, I was doing other things. And then the second year I was able to bring my grades up to a point where I graduated with laude. So I was above that I think it was 3.5 or 3.65 that you needed to graduate with honors. And then I went down to Purchase. So SUNY Purchase is really who sent me to Italy.
So hey, we're going to go to break.
Okay.
Can you? I'm sorry to ask, but just your voice is so beautiful. Can you share a little bit of your talent with our listeners here?
What would you like to hear?
I wouldn't even know where to start.
You know what?
But you sang some great. How about the national anthem?
No, wait. I got this.
Smoke on the water, man.
Okay, this is what I was singing in my head as I came here, so this will be quick, and I think it's appropriate. Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, and with thanksgiving I'll be a living sanctuary for you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to Virginia McIntyre here on the Next Step Show. We'll be right back.
Eyes on Rochester is a full-service ophthalmology office, and we specialize in general ophthalmology, taking care of people from childhood to adult and seniors. We do general eye exams. We specialize in cataract surgery, corneal surgery, and disease, as well as LASIK surgery. We also have a full-service optical shop and contact lens fitting service.
Visit Eyes on Rochester at 1157 Fairport Road.
The fair tax replaces the income tax and abolishes the IRS for good. But that's not going to happen if the current crop of politicians have their way. Fair Tax New York is looking for motivated citizens who are willing to contact candidates and get them to sign the Fair Tax Pledge, promising to push for fair tax if elected. Call Fair Tax New York at 585-944-0588. That's 585-944-0588. Make that call today.
Youth for Christ Rochester, a youth development organization in downtown, is dedicated to changing city kids' lives through life and relational leadership coaching and finding their purpose and destiny in Christ. Now, in addition to our Friday night basketball and P31 Girls, the Fatherhood Initiative, Summer Camp, we've added YFC Arts Academy. To get connected or find out more, check out our Facebook page at Youth for Christ Rochester or go to yfcrochester.org/donate.
Hi, this is attorney Christine Demo Vasquez. For more than 18 years, I've provided quality legal services tailored to the unique needs of each of my clients. I take the time to educate my clients about the law, explain the legal process, listen carefully, answer questions, and keep my clients informed throughout the process.
An attorney who understands the complexities of the family court system. Call attorney Christine Demo Vasquez at 585-427-0675. 585-427-0675.
Peter Vasquez and Aisha Kreutz, The Next Step Show on the WYSL stations.
Algo en tu cara me fascina, algo en tu cara me da vida.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to The Next Step Show. That's right, tu sonrisa. You know, all it takes, I've said this a million times, a little smile, ladies and gentlemen. Someone watching you from afar, you just give that little sonrisa and you can brighten that individual's day. Ladies and gentlemen, it takes less muscles to smile. Here in studio, it's me, your conservative New Yorker, and our extraordinary machine, Aisha Kreutz. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, we can't forget the king of the castle, the voice of liberty himself, right here, Roberto Sabaje. And of course, the voice you heard right before we went on break, it wasn't an angel that flew in. Although some might think because that voice sounded so nice. Absolutely. We have Virginia McIntyre. Amongst many, many great titles, she carries today the title of candidate for Monroe County Legislator District 4. And so now, welcome back. Thank you for not leaving. So Virginia, you're running for County Leg.
Yes.
You've got great things. Briefly, tell us why are you running? What do you stand on?
Okay. Well, first of all, I was watching everything play out locked in a room in Italy in 2020. And I've been observing the situation for a long time, actually from the entertainment perspective, because a lot of the messaging that we're facing right now went through the entertainment industry before it hit the general public. That's how they seeded this information out there. And I after living in a country that had public utilities, public health care, all of the programs, I mean, I was the interpreter for I forget his name, Jeremy Rifkin, there it is, and his European Dream Tour, where he was talking about all of the social programs in Europe. And so I believed in those social programs, especially coming out of college. When I first went to Italy, I thought, oh, yeah, public health care is a great idea. And, oh, yeah, public this and public that. And I had 20 years experience with it. And 20 years experience with all of these different programs, I can tell you the people that get affected the most by public health care, by public utilities, by all the different social programs that exist in Europe are the poor, are those that are already disenfranchised. And I was always very proud to tell people in Italy, I was sort of the point woman for all things English and American in Mantova, which is a very large area. because I was working, I sent you guys a little bit about me, but I was working with a lot of different businesses to help them translate their websites and on their messaging, right? Their marketing messaging that they were getting wrong all over the place. And so because I was this sort of point woman for all things American, and I would have to explain a lot of the misconceptions that are out there in Europe about Americans, right? It made me a fierce defender and fiercely proud of America and being American. And it made me very sad to see how many Americans will go online and bash America when they have no idea what they're talking about because they've never lived anyplace else.
To those people, I say, hey, you're welcome. And
Yeah.
then they're like, why? And I'm like, well, because people like me went out there and made sure you had the freedoms to go and bash your country.
That's right.
Because guess what? And I traveled. I've been to, I think, over 23 different countries. I lived in most of them for at least over 2 months. And the one thing that it did for me, like you just said, it solidified my belief that America is not just the freest country in the world. It is also the only country in the world that worries about its individuals' prosperities.
Oh, my gosh. Yes.
But you know what, though? It's also the only country in the world that seems to forget that our aging population are actually valuable and should be honored, not incarcerated.
Amen to that.
Yes.
Wow. Yes, exactly. And while I was over, look, I actually went to sing quite often. I donated my time to go sing in nursing homes over there. And I've been visiting some of the nursing homes here as well. I sang at the Jewish home a couple months ago, and I've sung at a couple of these places here. Here, they are gorgeous. They are like 5-star hotels. Over there, and again, they do it. I don't want to ever criticize Italy too much in this. They do what they can. But, oh, my goodness, is there a difference? Yeah. I was over at the places that I was singing in were these, nursing homes. And they do, I want to repeat this, I can't say this too strongly. They do the best they can. But it would break my heart every time I would go to one of these places because I would see the conditions. And I would see that they're elderly. If they were not living at home, because Italy is great because they have a lot of their elderly living at home. They'll have 2 and 3 generations in the same household for as long as they can. Yes, we should be doing that.
I did that.
Yep.
You're doing it, too.
Yeah, I'm doing it. Well, I'm not. I have my own apartment now, but I've been taking care of my mom. I mean, that's been a big thing for me, obviously. Because my mom, as you both know, was in critical condition when I came home.
Yeah.
That wasn't the initial reason that I started packing things up to come home. Because for those of you, we've had to kind of gloss over this briefly, but I had a business that I had up and running for almost 20 years. We were a little short of 20 years while I was over there, where I was doing interpreting and language training and marketing consultancy, which I was basically helping people to understand how to market things to Americans. When they would listen, because sometimes, clients, they do what they want to do anyway.
It's like in politics when you try and tell someone, a candidate running for office, something, and you're like, oh.
Yep. Well, that messaging is very important.
It is.
And because I was the university that I was working at, they had a marketing program, right? So I was actually the supervisor on many of the theses where they were looking at things, the studies they were doing on colors, on wording, on other things. Like I have that background. Because I was working there and because I had so much contact with it back and forth. We also had a program in what's called international relations and cultural mediation. So we had a program at one point where they were bringing Jewish people together with Muslim people to do what is called cultural mediation. You bring 2 groups of to the table that do not want to speak. And you are the mediating point between those 2 groups. And I was helping train our students to do this constantly in English.
Thinking about the makeup, I don't know Gates specifically, but I know, Rochester in general.
Yes.
As far, we have a pretty culturally diverse.
I think so.
Very much so.
Well, Gates is very diverse, actually.
Yeah.
Gates has one of the higher numbers of diversity.
Well, because we have the aging population, the one that I care about them deeply. Not just because of my mother, but because I have always had older people. I grew up with my grandparents. I grew up playing cards and eating cookies with people that were grandparent age, right? They were my friends when I was a weird child, and a lot of people my age did not want to speak to me because, I would talk about things I would talk about the meaning of life at like 8 years old. That does not make you very popular with the other kids on the playground. But when I was sitting playing cards with the elderly, they would always welcome me. So I've always had this deep connection to older people in general. And that was only strengthened while I was over in Italy, where they were also very protective of me. And in Gates, we have a very large, older Italian population that I've been, working with quite a bit.
Being able to mediate not only culturally, but as well, right, politically, when we're talking about getting two sides that don't maybe want to talk or have real conversation together, right? I mean, that I can see that being an extremely valuable skill to be able to say, hey, different cultures, different political views, how are we going to come together and have this conversation on, sometimes some very tough topics. And, again, Monroe County, Gates, there are a lot of very tough topics that are going on that, I don't know, that need to get we need to get them resolved.
That's why I approached that is why I approached the Republican Party in the first place. The first day I was there, I was like, listen, I have this knowledge, I have these skills. How can I help you as far as candidates go, as far as, your outreach with the public? And I think in the beginning, people didn't even take it too seriously. When I was out knocking on doors, I went past. You do the first season of petitions, all right? That's what the committees do. But then I was noticing, well, nobody's going to their school boards. Nobody's going to the fire district meetings. Nobody's going to the town board meetings. I went out and specifically drew up the copies of the tax bill that I had and was knocking on doors and giving a list of public meetings to the residents that I could, right? Especially in those areas where there's one side of Howard Road, the side my mother lives on, that is underrepresented in Gates government. So I was on the comprehensive plan update board that they were doing, which is a statistical breakdown of the area that you have to do every 5 years. And the chair of it, who's a Democrat, well, she used to be a Democrat. I think now she's an independent. Her name's Christine. She said, well, Virginia, there are areas of Gates where they just don't clearly feel like they can approach the political sphere or administration. And I went, I'll fix that. And I just went out knocking on doors. I wanted to make sure that they had the survey that we were doing about whether or not they were happy with the services. And then I kept doing it. It got addictive for me, talking to our residents, these people in this town I grew up in, right, about the administration and about things that, I knew things, but I did not know other things, right? Obviously, when I was in Italy, I was talking about our school system, right? I was talking about school boards. They didn't have something like a school board. I was like, oh, you don't? They didn't have after-school sports. No, you have to pay for those separately. They didn't have a chorus at the school. You have to go to the Conservatory for that. They had everything.
Italy, right? So Italy schools,
actually, or if you're homeschooler.
Italy, if I understand correctly, we had a few Italian exchange students. Their schools aren't like here where we have elementary and high school. There you go through, I think it's elementary. And then after elementary, you go into what they call kind of like a pre-college.
Well, it's okay. They're middle schools, la scuola media. Yes, sort of. It's by the time you're done with middle school, you have to make choices for the program that you will follow.
So and your high school is specific to that.
But that, just so we're clear, though, that was education up, even in America up until the last 100 years. Like that is how education should, that's why they called it secondary school, because even going into high school was, again, back in the day before government got involved in schools. That's how it was. You would go and you'd say, hey, I have some choices to make on what I want to do with my life, even going into high school.
Yeah, in Italy, it's like, so in Italy, when you go to high school, you're pretty much, it's like a pre-college. When you leave high school, you can get a job.
Absolutely. And I was teaching at the scientific, I was collaborating because I was an outside collaborator when I would come in and do it. I was teaching at the scientific high school and at the trade school that was adjacent to it. So it was IT. So I was also teaching the people that were going to become technicians, because English is a skill. It's the skill that they need. And I was actually working with a lot of people over there that had been laid off because businesses were laying people off right and left. The job market was terrible at that time. And I would have these, middle-aged men that were coming to me and no longer knew how to support their families without the income that they had. And it broke my heart. And they didn't have English. They had all, up until some point, they all studied French because that's what they were told to do, and it was easier from Italian. And then they found themselves in this job market in the early 2000s where everybody needs English. You have to have English. You have to have English because if you're doing a trade deal between, Croatia, which is right next door to Italy, and Italy, you need a common language, and French is not it. So they were all using English. Like if you have somebody from Spain, Italy, I don't know, the Czech Republic, and Finland in a room, they're speaking English. And so a lot of the professionals that were there, men that were used to making a certain amount of money and being able to support their families and having, the wife have a part-time job or even stay home, found themselves from one day to the next without work, without income, and they were desperate to learn as quickly as possible.
I have a question real quick. I don't know if it's too controversial or not, but were you, and I don't know the answer, but were you in Italy during COVID?
I was.
You were?
I was locked in a room watching everything play out in America the way one watches a B-level horror flick, screaming, "Don't go open that door, don't," and just watching everything
Although I heard
play
Italy
out.
was pretty,
It was
clamped
so.
down.
We talk a lot about
say,
Australia. Yeah. Italy was crazy. You had to have your paperwork on you if you went to the supermarket.
Nazi type
If they
of stuff.
caught you leaving whatever the barriers were of that town, and you did not have the paperwork to justify why you were leaving, you got a fine, and it was a heavy fine. I had people. You couldn't go for a jog. It was what I saw play out in the community, and I love these people. Again, I do not want to make it sound like I am being overly critical of them. Okay,
Right.
But I watched people turn on their neighbors. They were narking on their neighbors on Facebook. I saw so and so out for a walk.
Well, that was happening here.
And
I'm sure
yes,
the politics here are
and
trying
so
to encourage that.
the town kept limiting and limiting and limiting. First it was, okay, well, you can go for a walk as long as you're social distancing. Then, and it was the old people that were suffering the most from this.
Right.
The elderly population that had lived through the Second World War, they were like, yeah, we're not doing this. We're not staying shut in our houses. So they would all kind of congregate in the parks, and they would get in trouble for it. So then
That's
they said
crazy.
that you could no longer congregate. You couldn't walk, by yourself without a mask, or you had to walk in single file with a mask. Then they looked over and said, oh, well, you can no longer jog or ride your bike. Oh, you can no longer walk your dog more than 20 feet outside of your house. Because people were using dogs.
And
People
are
were
still
borrowing
dying.
dogs.
Right, and people are still dying, and they're like, this is not...
And the elderly were so desperate for human contact, they were going to the supermarket and congregating, and then they wanted to limit how many times we could go to the supermarket because the elderly were going in every single day to get their prosciutto or their cold cuts, these things that they would go in to get, and talking to each other, and they could not stop them. They were the ones, and the younger people were screaming their heads off, saying, "You've got to stay at home. You've got to stay at home." These people just wanted to see, especially those that were living alone. Maybe they were widows or widowers. They wanted to be around people.
So even at our worst, the United States of America is still the freest country
Oh my gosh,
in this
yeah.
globe. So listen, let's talk a little bit more about politics. I want to know, why should people vote for you? We've got about, maybe another 15, 20 minutes in the show, and I want to spend that really, I'm going to take my friend host hat off for a second, and we're just going to beat you up.
Okay.
Right?
Let's hear it.
We're going to beat you like you're a Democrat. How's
Okay.
that?
Well, you should. You should. Look.
So on June
like a
27th, you have a Republican primary.
That is correct.
Early voting, ladies and gentlemen, in New York
17th.
State starts June 17th through the 25th.
Yes, it does.
So what do you stand on? What's your platform? What's the one thing that Republicans should hear and know, and why should they vote for you?
Okay, well, this is not just a Republican point perspective, right? Frank L. Coffer, who is the person that I'm going in to replace, he's retiring out, has been very good about being a point of reference for the community. When I knock on doors, at least 1 in 3, if not 2 in 3. So we're talking about 33 to 66% of the people in Gates will tell me that they have met Frank L. Coffer and that he has helped them personally.
Great guy,
and,
phenomenal.
And that
phenomenal guy.
creates a trust between the people and their representatives, knowing that you can pick up the phone and call Frank and that he will move mountains to help you, or at least to point you in the right direction. Because
That's
a county
what it should be.
legislator cannot necessarily do certain things. But Frank would get on the phone and start calling everybody that he could to make sure that you had the number for that. I have already begun doing that while I've been on the campaign trail, right? I have bumped into people that have said, I have this problem with a tree in front of my house. Okay, I call up. I had a lady tell me yesterday, well, they haven't done any work on our street. I've got to call her back today because I've been finding out the information because she lives on a state road, because I thought it was county, and I found out talking to the highway department, no, it's a state road. There are plans to do things on that particular road. I'm going to call her back on that. I've been trying to get back to people on those questions that they ask me constantly so that we can build that relationship that Frank has always had with the community, because they need that. Everywhere I go, they look over and they go, oh, well, the politicians come here when they campaign, but then we never see them again.
Right.
No, I have put everything on hold, right? Since I've been home, initially I put it on hold for my mom, and I have no regrets, right? I don't need to become super wealthy. I need to live in a place where, A, my mother's alive, which I'm very happy about, which we got her off dialysis. There's a whole story there. But I need to live in a thriving, prosperous community.
Amen.
And that only happens if I take the time to build those relationships. So everything will be on hold in my life for this job. I don't care about the money. I would do it for free, right? As of right now, it pays only $18,000 a year. That's not a problem. I haven't been working when I've been taking care of my mother. I have lived without a paycheck now since 2021. I don't care, right? I want to dedicate all of my energy, all of my forces to this.
Well, and we talk a lot about that in general, like in our lives and on this show, about our civic duty.
Yes.
Right? And again, if we're going to go back, to our founding fathers, these weren't paid positions anyway.
That's right.
And you know what I mean? Like, that isn't why we do it. And we are at a critical time in our nation, in our communities, where it should be all hands on deck, where we are putting everything aside so that we can focus on having a thriving community.
That's correct.
Right? Because it's broken right now. And if we don't get good people in, right?
Absolutely.
Maybe people that sing in their head, I want God to be your sanctuary.
Absolutely.
Your living sanctuary, and bringing that into the world into the political realm, right? And who you are in that. If we don't get more of that, we are going to wind up looking more like some of these places like Cuba and Italy and unfree.
Well, the saddest thing that I heard in Italy, right, was when Italians say "Siamo in Italia," right? What they are talking about is a sense of hopelessness, right, that they have against the fact that there's so much bureaucracy and red tape and nothing ever gets done.
And we're headed that road.
Which, by the way, "Siamo in Italia" means we're in Italy, right? They'll throw up their hands and go, if something goes wrong, they'll look at you when you're complaining about it and go, we're in Italy. What do you expect, right? When we say, on the other hand, we're in America.
That's right.
It used to mean the place where prosperity is possible, where anything is possible.
Anything is possible.
I am watching America being forced into that mindset right now that Italy has, and it's breaking my heart.
Right.
So I want the community to feel empowered, and I want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
And it's worth it to me to put everything else on hold for that.
They're even using the language like Italy and some of these other communist, socialist type of country has. Virginia, can you describe the role of a county legislator for our listeners, like a job description? What is it? What you get elected? What does it mean? I know you're making phone calls, resolving issues, but it's got to be deeper than that.
Well, okay. Well, first of all, the county legislature is the body that governs all of the county policies. So you've got county roads, you've got the county hospital, you've got the water system that runs across the county. Okay, you've got Monroe Community College, which is a county college. So there are services that need to be governed by the county rather than the individual towns. And that's what a county legislature does, okay? They are also responsible for basically distributing the grant money that comes through the state, which is why I have been working so much with Gates to try and understand some of the state laws for NYSERDA. And I know that some of that stuff that I'm doing with the Conservation Board is not necessarily Republican-friendly stuff. But I think if we focus our efforts on education rather than things like gas stoves, which is the stupid stuff that's coming through the pipeline right now, that we can get some funding out to these towns. And I think that there has been, right now, I was talking to George Herbert, who's currently in office, about the budget and the way that the ARPA funds were given out. Now, they did give out some ARPA funds to our ambulance, and they did give out some of those funds to the fire district for, I believe it's dispatch materials, which is good. But I feel like a lot of that money did not really get distributed out to the towns, and I would like to understand what's happening there better.
When you find that out, you're going to come back in the show as a legislator. You're going to share with our listeners all the administrative fees that were charged to all that free money that we got, which is why there's none left.
I don't know if it's administrative fees as much as it is the way that applications were sent in. I don't know if there was a problem with certain places sending their applications in properly, if they didn't ask for enough guidance on things. I mean, it sounded like it had to be very specific.
Well, people were getting paid a lot of money to administer a lot of the free money that went out, and I kept thinking, boy, that's kind of weird. You're going to pay somebody $130,000 to manage this one. But I got another question for you, and only because we're running short on time, I want to make sure that we get a few of these. Virginia, this question may be a little difficult, right? And I know that that not everybody running for office likes to answer these kind of questions. But what I'd like to know, and I think our listeners would like to know, once you're in the county legislator, will you be, or can we count on you being a vocal and loud advocate for life? I'm talking from womb to tomb.
Yes, absolutely.
So let me tell you why this is so important. Right now, the city
and that's
of
a hard
Rochester,
thing to say because I'm sure that's going to upset a whole bunch of people.
Yeah,
but
right now,
I have my own personal experience, and because of my personal experience, I think that we need to change the conversations that we're having and the way that we approach this issue. And I think a lot more women that have these personal experiences need to speak up. I don't know if legislation is really the right way to handle this. I think that there needs to be a lot more education and outreach rather than legislation. I don't necessarily think that banning something makes people less likely to do it. At times, if we look at like drugs and other things, it almost makes them more likely. But I think that the conversations that we're having around this and the propaganda that has been put out there needs to be fought by information.
I think even if we were able to get to a point where the government would just stay out of the way in that respect, we'd be... So, for example, the city of Rochester has now prohibited those of us that peacefully protest once a month. So the fourth Saturday of every month, we a bunch of people meet in front of the Planned Parenthood and University, and we pray, we share stories from the sidewalk, right from our sidewalk
Saving
advocates.
Babies, helping families.
And this... Yep, baby showers, everything we can.
All sorts of things.
And now the city of Rochester said...
We can't put our speakers
If you put your speaker on our sidewalk...
They're going to confiscate it.
They're going to confiscate it, and they're going to start... Now, so okay, we said, okay, we'll respect that, and we came with baby strollers, and that was a problem.
They said they were going to take the baby
So the
strollers.
next time, we're like, okay, then we'll hold them. But apparently a human at that point becomes... So more and more the government really... Again,
well,
you
they
see
don't
this
want
in Europe.
people to know. That's how afraid they are of the message, right?
Right.
Because they know right now that once the message changes, the amount of work that particular company is making money on will go down. And that's why they've switched gears and they're targeting other things. I'm sure you guys know that they're the ones that are responsible for things like hormone blockers and other things being pushed out there because they make money off of it.
And from a racial
it's
perspective,
a money game.
They're the biggest...
Well, it's all about eugenics.
Yeah,
Well-
what are the numbers on abortion for the black community again?
In Monroe County?
Just in general, Monroe County.
I mean, overall, it's pretty steady within a couple points, but you will see, blacks make up 14% of the population. We have about 38% of all abortions. And, that 14%, guys, if you break it down, becomes 3% if you say...
Yeah, childbearing
age women make up, black women make up 3 to 4%, and 38% of the abortions, and it's absolutely atrocious. But again, and remember, Planned Parenthood, up until the late 80s, was a eugenics society, like outwardly. They just changed their messaging. It wasn't like they were hiding it. That's who they were. That's how they were founded on. And all the way until the mid-'80s, they were members of the eugenics society. The board members were all part of the eugenics society. So it's not like we're, saying something that is controversial.
They had a link for people to donate specifically to abort black babies.
Correct.
Well, up
not
until
a link,
recently.
but you could call and you could say, I want my money.
A link, phone number, whatever. It's an option for people to do.
It was an option where you could. But I do want to say, too, when we're looking at, the life issue, Virginia brought up something very important when we're talking about, so we do personhood, right? Am I not a child? And talking about having a personhood amendment in the Constitution, right? But as we're doing that, really the thing is, once you can get, I don't care what amendment it is, once you can get the amendment in there, you've changed the culture so much you don't actually need it.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's right,
it's the
that
cultural
is-
look. I was talking to somebody about this. We were in Albany and we were talking to some of the state senators or Congress people, I forget. And I brought up why are we allowing Planned Parenthood to put money into films, for their messaging to be put into films. We don't do that with cigarettes anymore. We don't do it with drugs. You're not encouraging, and yet they dump a lot of money into television shows. I remember watching a television show that was like a rom-com television show where the one woman goes out, her friend goes out and gets an abortion. She calls it an abobo. Okay? There have been so many. If we go back and watch the Sex and the City excerpt where they're talking about abortions, it has been drilled into the minds of women that this is normal, that it's okay, that you're never going to think about it anymore because it's just a clump of cells, so it's okay to go out and do. They never give you the real story about the heartache, the regret, the asking yourself about it 40 years later.
And thinking about where your family came from, this is full circle. Women are powerful.
Yes,
what they do
are.
is they diminish who we are
Yes.
as human beings and tell us that we can't do something. Oh, single mom. Oh, this, that. Instead of saying, you know what? You're in a tough position, woman. It doesn't matter. Woman, hear me roar. Where is that?
Yeah.
I can do anything. I was created for this specific thing.
We make life.
To make life and hold it. And they're taking that and trying to rip it away from us as women.
Well, they're making it
It's wrong.
shameful. They're making it shameful. It's worse than
That's
that. They're
right.
making it shameful because if
That's
a woman
right.
decides to stay home and be a stay-at-home mom, we've
Right.
been taught to turn our noses at
Yeah.
that. Well, there's nothing more
There's
noble
nothing-
than taking care of your family.
That's right.
Even when I've been taking care of my mother, I've had certain
People be like, "Oh, what are you
look
doing?"
over and say, "Oh, she doesn't have a job." What are you talking about? Taking care of my mother is a job.
And it's noble and it's
Listen,
great. Go ahead.
I was a stay-at-home dad for a short period when my wife and I got first married, where we made some arrangements, and it ain't easy, and I surely don't want to do it again. Hey, I've got one more question, but I need you to answer it briefly.
Okay.
That question is, what law will you get rid of the moment you get into Monroe County, into the legislature?
What law can you? Okay, this is a great thing. I would like to see the permits, the permit laws for gun rights be briefer. Right now, it takes 6 to 12 months to get a permit process. I need to understand what's going on and why the counties that are near us, like Genesee County, it takes 2 months. So why in Monroe County does it take 6 to 12 months? It's not a law, but I need to understand what's happening in Monroe County that is slowing down those permits. Because women are the fastest growing community that is asking for those pistol permits. I'd like one myself and can't get one because of all the barriers that they put up in front of us.
How do people get a hold of you?
Oh, yes. Well, okay. Obviously, my Facebook page is where you can find information about what I'm doing on the campaign. So it's Virginia Eleanor McIntyre or Virginia McIntyre for County Legislator. And my phone number, right? It's 585-851-9243. That goes directly to my cell phone. Now, if I'm talking to a voter, I won't be able to respond. I don't have voicemail, but I call everybody back. And then my Gmail is Virginia4District4 at gmail.com, I believe, right?
Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it right here on the Next Step Show. Virginia McIntyre. There's a primary on June 27th. Early voting is 6:17 through 6:25. Bob, I think it's time for...
Now, Free Soup with Aisha Kreutz.
So, guilt. Verb or noun? Think about that. You know, later on today, you're going to be going out. You're going to get something to eat. You know, you're going to be being like, yeah, I'm hungry. You know, you're going to eat it, taste it, love it. You know, or maybe you'll hate it, right? Maybe it'll be disgusting. Go down. But later on in the day, you know, you're going to have a little movement and poop it out. A little poop. Got to go in there, right? And then when you poop it out, you're going to pick it up and go hand that to someone. Why would I take your poop? Your experiences and my experiences are different. If you're out there guilting people, there's a problem.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Free Soup by Aisha Kreutz, and she said poop, just so you could chickle and chuckle. Anywho, you're listening to the Next Step Show with Peter Vasquez and Aisha Kreutz. Today we had Virginia McIntyre. Don't forget to check her out. Go to her website, because guess what? You got to cast a vote. Hey, be a leader.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
Oh, the pleasure was mine, and I'm sure our listeners enjoyed it. Be a leader, ladies and gentlemen. Advertise with us. Check out our website, nextstepshow.com, or don't forget, 1040WYSL.com, another cool website. And
WYSL1040.com.
Oh, what did I say? Oh, dear, I keep messing those up. Anywho, until next week.
No sé ni